History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to this 517th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we have Haunted Cemeteries number 28.
Woohoo! Always a favorite.
And we're not just going to talk about haunted cemeteries on this one. We have a few odds and ends with this one, too, if you get my meaning. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the spectacular crew Michael, Jennifer, and Justin.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now this moment in Oddity.
Who here loves bacon? Raise your hand.
Me.
I'm sure many of you listeners raised your hands with Diane and I. Okay, now, who here loves lake bacon? What is lake bacon, you ask?
Is it an alligator?
You're about to find out. Well, back at the start of the 20th century, America was experiencing a meat shortage. The population was growing by leaps and bounds. Land was overgrazed, and the bison were in danger of becoming extinct. A resourceful fellow by the name of Frederick Russell Burnham came up with an alternative to the typical meats Americans consumed. Can you guess what lake bacon is referring to now?
Nope. Fish?
Frederick was a soldier and chief of scouts for the British Army during the Second Boer War. He then made his home in Africa in 1893. Meat animals of American fare such as cows, sheep, and chickens were not native to America, and yet that is what made up a large part of people's diets. So Frederick Burnham proposed hippopotamus meat. At the time, African animals like ostriches and camels had been introduced to particular areas of America and had adapted very well. Even Louisiana Congressman Robert Broussard was on board with the importation of hippos, thinking that they would solve his problem with invasive water hyacinths. The plants plagued the waters of New Orleans, choking out the fish supply, and hippopotami love eating hyacinths. A bill was then introduced in 1910, the H.R. 23261. Also known as the Hippo Bill. It was meant to acquire $250,000 in funding to import useful animals, of which hippos were included, into America. The New York Times even wrote an article describing the taste of hippo meat, with many Americans believing that the meat would be available very soon. The bill failed, which ultimately turned grazing lands into feedlots, and Everglades and marshes were drained to create grasslands for cattle. Had the bill passed, Sunday morning breakfast could very well find many of us noshing on lake bacon today, and that certainly is odd.
Grab your slippers, hot chocolate, flashlight, and maybe even that baseball bat.
And now, this month in history.
In the month of December on the 18th in 1966, the original telecast of How the Grinch Stole Christmas premiered on CBS in the United States. Since then, the children's book turned animated movie has become a perennial holiday special. Most of our listeners appreciate the original movie's narrator and voice of the Grinch as performed by Boris Karloff.
One of our faves.
Yeah, we've done the life and afterlife of him as well. The story of the Grinch with a heart that is 2 sizes too small displays how a little bit of kindness can change the outward perception of a person or Grinch. Disguised as Santa Claus, the Grinch raids the homes of Whoville on Christmas Eve. He steals their gifts and holiday treats, assisted by his dog Max, who's disguised as a reindeer. The pair then retreat to the Grinch's icy mountaintop lair with their loot. On Christmas morning, the Grinch is shocked to hear the Who's of Whoville still singing a joyous song despite having all their gifts and holiday meals stolen. His shenanigans to stop Christmas in Whoville were thwarted in part by the kindness of Cindy Lou Who, as well as the singing of the Who's. It's then that the Grinch realizes that Christmas still came regardless of his actions. It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled and puzzled till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas perhaps means a little bit more. The Grinch then proceeds to bring all the gifts and Christmas goodies back to Whoville and is welcomed back into their community with the Grinch himself carving the roasted beast for the Christmas feast.
Cemeteries are always fun to visit, and when they have ghost stories connected to them, it's even better. On this Haunted Cemeteries episode, we feature cemeteries in Alabama, Ohio, Texas, and Nebraska. As taphophiles, we also treasure the unique and odd that can be found in cemeteries, and we're going to share some of that here too, as well as a very solemn cemetery for infants. And who doesn't want to hear about a place connected to death called Dead Man's Hole? Join us for a walk through some cities of the dead.
Dead Man's Hole sounds intriguing, doesn't it, Kelly?
It sure does. Let's start with that one.
All right. Death for so many has a pit stop at a mortuary before heading off to a cemetery. We're going to start this episode off talking about an obscure mortuary that was shared to us by listener and executive producer Beth Vanderyacht. Ever heard of Dead Man's Hole, Kelly?
I have not.
The River Thames has played final resting place to many bodies for hundreds of years. The Tower Bridge was completed and opened in 1894. The bridge was designed in the neo-Gothic style and formed from a solid steel frame after a competition was run for a design and abandoned. I don't know if they said, we don't like anything that anybody submitted, so forget it.
Picky.
Yeah, or they ran out of money. I don't know. But there were 50 entries that had been submitted, and one that was rejected was by civil engineer Sir John Wolfe Barry. An architect named Sir Horace Jones teamed up with Barry, and they altered the design slightly and proposed this new altered design, and it gained approval from Parliament in 1884. Jones never got to see the bridge finished as he died 1 year into construction. The bridge took 8 years to complete with 31 million bricks and 13 million rivets installed into it.
Dang.
It allowed ships through by moving the roads like two giant seesaws that pivot. So it wasn't like a drawbridge like we're used to where the two sides of the street just go up. They would pick up and turn sideways or something.
Weird.
And, it was weird.
On the eastern side of the bridge, there's an alcove under the bridge that has glossy white tiles. This is Dead Man's Hole. Like so many bridges in the world, there are many people who have met death from the bridge. These could be victims of accidents, murder, or suicide. Their bodies tended to float into this alcove, and a pole and hook system would be used to fish the bodies out of the water. The bodies would be left on display to see if anyone would identify and claim them. Sometimes those bodies would be waiting a long time. Long enough to explode from decomp.
That's why the entire alcove is covered in white tiles from bottom to top.
Oh, Lord.
Easier to clean.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me this paragraph. Golly. You can visit this spot and would never know what had once been here, save for the hook and pole that still hang on the wall.
And it's very cool. They do have a sign that does say Dead Man's Hole. So
all right.
They embrace what it used to be.
I can't believe they still have the hook and pole there.
Yeah, at least the pictures that I last saw, there was that hanging on the wall, and the guy who had written an article about it goes, I wonder if people know what that had used to be used for.
Yeesh.
I mean, now they probably could use it to pull, crap that gets thrown into the river out other than dead bodies. But
Great.
have you ever gone camping with a grave?
I've not done that ever, I don't believe.
Yeah.
Unless it was an unmarked grave.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in, let's say, a national park that might have a cemetery in it, maybe camped there, but I haven't camped at a campsite that actually has a grave right there.
Right.
This next burial isn't haunted that we know of, but it's interesting because of its location, and we figured you taphophiles would appreciate hearing about it. In the Ossining State Forest Campground, there's a campsite that overlooks Lake Huron. Not many people would expect to find a grave at a campsite, but this pine-surrounded and beach-adjacent site is the final resting place for A.J. Michalowski. And he's been here a long time. An old gravestone marks the spot under a tree, and most people find it adorned with trinkets left behind as memorials. A.J. was only 26 when he drowned in Lake Huron back in 1865. He had worked nearby at the old Oliver sawmill, and one day, when he was off of work, he decided to sail a small boat across Thunder Bay to Alpena. This was in November, and Lake Huron is known to get some wind that's nicknamed the Gales of November. Must be some intense stuff. A burst of wind probably capsized the small craft, and AJ drowned. His body washed up on shore very near to where he's buried. If you want to camp next to a dead guy, ask for site number 4.
Alrighty then.
And I have no idea why they didn't take him somewhere else to bury him. It's like, well, guess we'll just bury him where he dropped here.
Maybe he was in a little state of decomp like the bodies at Dead Man's Hole.
Yeah, I mean, a body that comes out of a lake can be pretty bloated and stuff. And maybe they just didn't have any friends or family. So I don't know. Just seems so weird to bury somebody right where you kind of find the body. Kelly, do you know your ABCs?
No, but I know my XYZs.
Oh, well, I was going to say, if you do know your ABCs, what are the last 3 letters?
Now on to the XYZ grave. So we'll throw in one more odd burial. This one is found in a gorgeous and very peaceful cemetery called Fountain Hill Cemetery. It's located in Deep River, Connecticut. Back in the winter of 1899, 4 men staged a bank robbery at the Deep River Savings Bank. What the robbers didn't know was that the bank had been tipped off that it was being targeted, and they hired a local man named Harry Tyler to guard the place at night. One of the men was in the process of prying open one of the bank's tall windows when a shot rang out and hit him in the head. He fell back dead, and his 3 accomplices scattered. Nobody identified or claimed the body, so the town decided to bury the criminal in an unmarked grave at the Fountain Hill Cemetery. Harry Tyler received a letter shortly after the burial, and it requested that the robber's grave be marked with a cross that had the letters X, Y, and Z on it. There was no name attached, but Tyler could tell that the writing was female. He complied. After the cross started to deteriorate, the town put a small shoebox-sized stone on the plot and marked it with XYZ. People claimed that a woman dressed in black would visit the grave every year in December. She would leave a small flower. Apparently, this went on for 40 years. A newspaper article identified the dead robber as Frank Howard, but his stone has still always just read XYZ.
Pretty weird. I don't know why
Very weird.
she has to have it marked with just those 3 letters. So first up for our haunted locations is this Arlington's Lost Cemetery of Infants. And we heard about this location from our friend Maria Wessenauer over at Hollywood Exhumed. And for those of you who've listened to our entire back catalog, which there is a lot there, she joined us on episode 364 to talk about the Andres Pico Adobe. This cemetery is located at 801 West Mitchell Street in the northwest corner of Doug Russell Park in Arlington, Texas. For most of history, an unmarried pregnant woman was a pariah and usually sent off into seclusion to have her baby. The Bayray Chaw Industrial Home was founded by Reverend James Tony Upchurch in 1903 and offered these women a place to stay. They not only had a place that cared for them, but they got training to help them reintegrate into society. The home became its own self-sustaining town. There was also an orphanage that opened here around 1935. I guess what had happened is the Reverend Upchurch had passed away, so his daughter took over, and then she turned it into an orphanage. As time went on, the home closed, and the buildings were demolished to make way for the University of Texas, Arlington. What has remained through it all is the Little Lost Cemetery that became a final resting place for babies who were stillborn or died from complications during childbirth. However, the first burial was Eunice Williams, who was one of the residents. I don't know if she died during childbirth or what. There are 80 graves in total. It is hard to find. Maria said that it is on the campus, I guess, of the University of Texas, Arlington, partially or something. People have reported seeing shadow figures darting between the trees, and the disembodied sounds of children and babies are heard. And what's really cool about that is if you're hearing the sounds of children, it makes me wonder, if they passed away as, say, a stillborn baby, they got to age up a little bit.
Yeah.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Kelly, as everybody knows, it's the holiday season. And during the holiday season, you want to give people a gift that kind of comes from the heart or has meaning, right? Especially the older we get.
Yeah, definitely. I know for many people, you get to a certain age and you don't really need anything. So you want to give a very heartfelt gift that is unique.
Well, we have something that has a lot of meaning. You guys have heard us talk about it before, and that's Storyworth. It's an online service that helps you and your loved ones preserve precious memories and stories for years to come. What Storyworth does is every week it emails whoever you've given the gift to, whether it's a relative, a friend, a spouse, a thought-provoking question of your choice from a vast pool of questions, or you can make up your own as well. And then at the end of the year, they compile all those questions and answers together, and they put them in a book form. And you can include pictures if you want to and add extra little things to it. And then it makes a great Christmas gift that you can give to the entire family. And that's what we did one year with my mom.
Yes, indeed.
We gave it to my mom. She spent a year answering the questions, and then we all got these bound books for Christmas that say Annette Student's Memories.
It's so beautiful. I love it. And it's a great way to preserve all the details of your loved ones' lives.
And one of the interesting questions that we asked my mom that she answered that you wouldn't necessarily think to ask, what were your friends like in high school?
Indeed.
And she really had to go back in those memory banks and think about what were my friends' names and what did we do? She said she didn't have a whole lot of friends in high school, but she said she usually ate lunch every day with Linda and Nancy Morris, Karen Quigley, and Barbara Wiley. They were a fun group of Christian girls, so they wouldn't get her into trouble. We laughed a lot and shared gossip during lunch. We ate at picnic tables outside and usually brought our lunch, but they could also buy stuff, so they would buy milk and big, soft chocolate chip cookies from a takeout window on the side of the cafeteria.
Gee, now I know where your chocolate chip cookie fetish comes from.
I could have that for lunch just by itself. Forget the sandwich.
It's a genetic thing.
Well, I tell you, reading stuff like that really connects you to your loved ones. I definitely felt more connected to my mom getting to read all of these great answers she had.
With Storyworth, you can give those you love most a thoughtful, personal gift from the heart and preserve their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/historygoesbump and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/historygoesbump to save $10 on your first purchase.
Next, we have the Bladden Springs Cemetery in Alabama.
Bladden Springs is located in Choctaw County in Alabama and is named for the nearby mineral springs that had a hotel and spa spring up around them. A cemetery was established and is located at 3599 Bladden Springs Road. It's surrounded by a wrought iron fence with the familiar arched wrought iron sign above the entrance. This is a fairly small cemetery with around 150 burials, mostly of families, but that doesn't stop it from having a big reputation as creepy and haunted. The main spirit belongs to Norman Staples, whose grave can be found toward the back of the cemetery and to the right under a Spanish moss-laden oak tree. Norman was the son of James T. Staples, who was a steamboat entrepreneur. Norman followed in his father's footsteps, and upon James's death, he took over ownership of the steamship James T. Staples, which had been launched in 1908. Papers declared this the grandest steamboat on the rivers of Alabama. Norman wasn't great with money and was soon heavily in debt, and the steamship was seized in 1912. Watching the steamship get auctioned off was too much for Norman, and he shot himself in the chest with a shotgun, killing himself on January 2nd, 1913.
It always blows my mind when people commit suicide with a shotgun. That is not easy to do, I would think.
And shooting himself in the chest. He was buried at Bladden Springs Cemetery, and soon after, crewmen on the James T. Staples claimed they saw Norman's spirit walking the deck at night. The ghost was also seen in the boiler room. Shortly after that sighting, the boiler exploded and killed 26 crewmen. This blew it from its moorings at the dock, and it floated down the Tombigbee River to the Bladden Springs Cemetery and sank. The explosion and sinking was the last great steamship accident on an Alabama river. Norman's spirit is said to have left the sinking ship and now resides at the cemetery, where it has been seen walking among the tombstones. He seems to favor the graves of his 4 children, James Alfred, Bertha Jedediah, Mabel Claire, and an unnamed infant. They all died before the age of 6.
Isn't that awful? All of his children died before they were 6 years old.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Now, you could sit here and say, well, maybe he was trying to warn the crewmen that the boiler was going to explode.
Or
but it does make you think, since it floated down the river and sank right where he's buried, that he was like, it's my ship. Nobody else is having it.
Right.
I'm going to destroy it. That is a crazy story, if true.
Indeed.
Regardless of whether they saw his spirit or not, it is pretty bizarre that right after he died and had to give up the ship, that it explodes and sinks right outside the cemetery.
Right. Now on to Chestnut Street Cemetery.
Chestnut Street Cemetery in Cincinnati is also known as the Old Jewish Cemetery and is the oldest Jewish burial ground west of the Alleghenies. In the early 1800s, there weren't many Jews in Cincinnati, and thus there was no separate burial ground for them. One of them was named Benjamin Lieb, although nobody knew he was a Jew. He was living as a Noahide as he married a Gentile. And I guess since his wife was a Gentile, they were raising his children as Gentiles, as the Jewish people would call them. They just assumed that's what he was, because what Jewish man wouldn't be raising his entire family as Jewish? He became gravely ill and knew he was going to die, so he went to the other Jews and begged them to bury him as a Jew. He then confided that he was a Jew, because they probably were like, well, dude, we can't do that. You're not Jewish.
Right.
The community decided that they should buy a plot of their own, and they paid $75 to Nicholas Longworth for a small plot. Lieb was the first burial. There would be 85 total burials before the cemetery was full. A cholera epidemic that hit Cincinnati in 1849 filled it up quickly. It was closed, and then it was decided to move the burials to a bigger cemetery named Walnut Hill Cemetery, and that's where our haunting comes in.
The haunting centers around a man named Edgar Johnson. He was a prominent New York lawyer whose father was buried in the Chestnut Street Cemetery. He threatened to sue if his father's remains were moved. So Edgar's father went nowhere, and Edgar himself died in 1893. He apparently intended to guard his father's remains even after death. A woman claimed to see something strange in the cemetery shortly after Johnson's death. She was passing a high brick wall that separated the cemetery from the street, and when she got to the gate, she looked through it, and something, quote, of large proportions wrapped in a winding sheet and face glowing as though phosphorescent. It had a smooth gait, and the arms were crossed before the breast. Its step was measured but long, and it appeared to move slightly above the grass. It encountered no obstacles, even though it passed the overturned head and footstones. No rustling came from its trailing garments. Occasionally it would stop, the arms drop, and the body bend forward as though the glowing eyes were making close quest of some object. End quote. This figure was heading straight for her, and she tried to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. She was frozen to her spot, unable to move. The figure then turned towards the shadows and dissolved away. The woman finally found her feet and headed for the police station where she reported the encounter. A police officer who took the report believed she had seen something that scared her, but as to what it was, he wasn't sure. People started claiming that it was Edgar guarding his father. Investigators also claim that this cemetery is a hotbed for EVPs and have captured human whispers or barking dogs when no dogs were heard audibly.
Now on to the Port Isabel Cemetery. This is located in Port Isabel, Texas. Port Isabel is as far south as one can get in Texas, and it's on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico. The town was established after the Mexican War of Independence and became a major exporter of cotton. Because of its location, the Union and Confederates fought over the town and each held control of it and its port at different times. But before this, Mexico owned this part of Texas, and the land where the cemetery was founded was granted to a man named Don Rafael Garcia by the Mexican government. Garcia founded a ranch on the land in 1829 called El Fronton de Santa Isabel, which translates to St. Elizabeth's Bluff. He didn't live at the ranch, but rather hired workers to operate it. These workers were the ones who laid out an acre of the land as a burial site. It's believed this dates back to the 1840s, but no burials remain from that time. The oldest marked grave dates to the 1880s. Initially, this was consecrated as Catholic ground, but it eventually became a community cemetery. The Champion family immigrated from Italy and owned the property in the early 19th century, and they donated the cemetery to the Catholic Church in 1926.
Apparently, there's a haunted tree here. A woman's grandmother had told her a story about what was called the Sybil Child, haunting a tree at the cemetery. The Sybil Child had been a prophet a couple of 100 years ago. This woman went to the cemetery after midnight on the night of a full moon, which her grandmother had told her were the requirements to guarantee a sighting. The woman waited to see if any tree in particular seemed to call to her, and then she headed towards a nondescript tree in the center of the graveyard. She knelt next to the tree and closed her eyes. Almost immediately, she saw, quote, flashes and glimpses too fast for me to process, played against the back of my eyelids. My eyes were closed, but I knew that the skin on my arms and neck had become the color of moss. I was sick. My skin turned to moss, then my flesh, and finally my bones showed through. End quote.
What a horrible vision to have.
Yeah.
Like, yee.
A little disconcerting there.
Just a little.
The woman then claimed that she was given a vision of cities filled with green moss that was an illness like a plague. It spread like wildfire across the world.
COVID?
Oh, goodness.
I don't know when she had this vision, but I was like, whoa, that's weird.
The woman screamed and her eyes snapped open. She was all alone in the cemetery and it was quiet. Her skin was normal. She claimed to see the vision over and over again for quite some time. Had she been given a vision by the Sybil Child? This child would go into a trance and walk the town every full moon, and she would report tales of doom. So she was like a walking harbinger of doom. One morning after a full moon, she simply disappeared, and now she gives visions to those seeking them at the Port Isabel Cemetery. There is also said to be an apparition of a little boy that wanders throughout the cemetery. And next we have Ball Cemetery.
Ball Cemetery is located at 20999 South 176th Street in Springfield, Nebraska. Cemetery is named for the Ball family, a pioneer family who own it privately. We're not sure when it was founded, but the oldest headstone dates to 1869. The cemetery was open to burials for people other than members of the Ball family. One of these people was William Lydiard. He was born in England in 1850 and immigrated to America when he was 17 years old. He served as Sharpie County Sheriff for 8 years and then served as Deputy United States Marshal for 5 years. He also served as a scout under General Miles, and the general gave him the nickname Rattlesnake Pete because he regularly killed rattlesnakes out on the trails. One day he killed as many as 500.
Sounds like a fishtail.
It sounds like a lot. I mean, to even see 500 rattlesnakes in one day.
As somebody that used to go out herping, which is looking for snakes,
Yeah.
I don't buy this worth a lick.
No, we had some friends when I was growing up, or I should say my parents had some friends, and we would go and visit them, and then we'd play with their kids. I can't even remember their names now. But they lived kind of out on the plains in Colorado, and we could never play outside of their house because they would have rattlesnakes out there. But even then, that was 4, 5. I don't know how you'd find...
not 500 in one day. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're visiting a rattlesnake roundup.
Of course, this is back in the 1800s, and a tall tale certainly could be weaved back then, and people would believe it.
It's grown over the years and years and years and years.
It's kind of like, I got that fish, and it was this big. And he left Springfield, Nebraska to join Buffalo Bill for some adventures. And, some people are like, did he really hang out with Buffalo Bill Cody? Well, here's a letter from Cody to Rattlesnake Pete. My dear Bill, I'll let you know about bringing Indians soon as I can hear from my agents in Paris in 2 or 3 weeks. So Buffalo Bill definitely got around. We are after a great building there. So I don't know what he was going to buy in France. My business is simply great. We will get pretty near to 70,000 here this week. And that was money, dollars. Your friend, Bill Cody.
Very cool. There are believed to be several spirits in the cemetery. One of them is Rattlesnake Pete, who passed July 15th, 1906 in Wyoming and was brought back to Nebraska to be buried in Ball Cemetery. There is another spirit who seems to be angry and has physically touched people in rough ways. There's a female spirit who has been heard both singing and speaking softly. She laughs too, particularly after someone feels their clothing getting tugged.
So I don't know if she partners with that angry spirit, or maybe she is that angry spirit. Then she laughs about what she does. I don't know.
She's trying to get your attention. The spirit is said to belong to a woman named Mary Mumford. A strange mist has formed in the cemetery, and disembodied footsteps are heard, especially in the fall when there are leaves on the ground.
There are many unique stories connected to these cemeteries, and really, all cemeteries. Each is special in their own way. Several seem to have spirits. Are these cemeteries haunted? That is for you to decide. Well, we just love doing these episodes. Hope you guys enjoyed that as well. We'd love to have you come over and check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. Cindy had posted under the Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst that we just did. I think all military bases are haunted, but that's another story. I wanted to share. I'm one of those people who saw a stealth bomber while it was being tested a few years before it was introduced to the world.
Oh, interesting.
My dad still thinks it was a UFO, but I'm confident that it's an identified flying object. It really was a creepy experience, though. And I said, you know what? Just to hear something that quiet, like you described it, because, I mean, I haven't experienced it, but you said it's just like no noise.
Right.
And we're used to jets making a lot of noise.
And I don't know if they make noise as they go faster, but it was just going very slowly. I mean, it looked like it would just fall out of the sky. It was bizarre.
So thank you for sharing that with us, Cindy. She's actually going to be getting in the mail the Christmas mailing.
She is?
Yeah. So all you executive producers out there should be receiving your Christmas mailing that we have sent out every year ever since I think we pretty much started the podcast. I may not have done it the first year or the second year, but we've done it consistently at least for the past 6. And we always make a special magnet for people's refrigerators. And they're all different. And some people have been collecting them and getting their refrigerators quite full.
Yes, they have. I've seen pictures.
So be watching for those in your mail. And if you guys want to join them to get the Christmas mailing next year, or, if you hop on here in the next few days, we could still get one out to you for December as well. We'd love to have you join us for that. Thanks for joining us for this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
You can find History Goes Bump on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Google Play, and anywhere you can listen to podcasts.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump.
Were you going to say Redux? You were.
I was.
This isn't a Redux doll.
Just recorded that. In the Ossinique State Forest campground, there's a campsite that... I don't know what the hell it overlooks.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It's a fascinating place to see.
Oh, man, I want to go there someday.
In the Ossinique State Forest campground, there's a campsite that overlooks Lake Huron. Huron? How exactly?
Huron. Ron.
That overlooks Lake Huron.
That overlooks Lake Huron, really?
That overlooks Lake Huron.
That overlooks... Oh, I thought you were being serious, like saying it again. Watching the steamship... Steamship?
I do know that particular, what do you want to call it, item can get kind of steamy.
With a steaming pile of poo. Don't leave that in.
They're going to auction that off? Who the hell's going to buy that? Yes! $5,000 for that steaming pile of poo.
Oh my God.
Must have come out of a celebrity or somebody really famous.
Oh, Lord. Okay. Moving on.
Well, people pay for their hair and stuff.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, just stop. Oh, God. Watching the steamship. Oh, my God.
And you said it again, Kelly. Do you need to go to the bathroom?
The pee does not want to come. That sounds great, too. The pee does not want to come out of my mouth. It's too damn early to record.
We had no bloopers for the last episode. We're blowing it on this one.
Blowing the steam off.
I am not getting close enough to blow the steam off of that pile.
Cut it out. Watching the steamship get
Kelly, you can do it. I know you can do it.
just tickled right now. Whew.